Hello and welcome to CoronaNomics, brought to you by Econ Films. This week, Bidenomics. The left wing of the Democrat Party wants democratic socialism. The Republican Party wants a blend of protectionism, deregulation and tax cuts. In between is Joe Biden, who will inherit a country still ravaged by the pandemic. But what is the economic programme of the president-elect? What is Bidenomics? And what should it be? I'm Ben Chu, economics editor of The Independent.
And I'm Lizzy Burden, economics reporter at The Telegraph. We'll be your guides, and if you like what we're doing, please hit the subscribe button as it helps people find us.
Joining us this week is Rebecca Henderson, one of 25 university professors at Harvard, a research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research, and a fellow of both the British Academy and of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. An expert on innovation and organisational change, her research explores the degree to which the private sector can play a role in building a more sustainable economy, a key goal of the president-elect.
Professor Henderson, welcome to CoronaNomics.
Lizzy and Ben, thank you very much. I'm absolutely honoured and delighted to be here.
That's very nice. Now let's talk about Bidenomics. Now we hear the phrase used and we've used it ourselves, of course, but do you see any substance in that phrase yet, Professor Henderson?
So, given that we're X days after the election and the current president still hasn't conceded, I think it's still early days. But yes, is there an economic plan an economic program that's in between what the Republicans are thinking of and what the left wing of the party is thinking about? Absolutely. I think it's old-fashioned, down the middle, split the difference. Let's care about the free markets, but let's also care about the welfare of workers and the long-term future of the planet. And to me, that's what Bidenomics is about.
Okay, well, let's talk about capitalism specifically, because you've written that capitalism is one of the great inventions of the human race, an unparalleled source of prosperity, opportunity, and innovation. Does it depress you slightly to see people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Squad describing themselves as socialists? Does that bother you?
No, it worries me. Maybe that's the same as being bothered. Yes, it worries me. Of course it does, because I meant what I said. I really do think free markets are one of the great inventions of the human race. And when people say, no, I'm a socialist, I'm nervous. I'm not panicked, because I think many people who say that, what they really mean is they want decent healthcare, decent treatment of workers, decent environmental protection, and we're going to call that socialist. I don't think they really mean state ownership of the means of production. Mm-hmm. If that really is what they mean, then I'm terrified, because the history of government taking over, the firms and the assets and trying to run the economy is a really, really bad one. But I don't think that's what they mean. I think they're looking at what has become almost a travesty of capitalism. I sometimes call it sort of capitalism red in tooth and claw, unrestrained, without guardrails, like, I'm going to make money, toast the planet, no problem. I'm going to make money, push wages below the level at which anyone can live, no problem. I'm still making money. To me, that's not capitalism. That's capitalism wildly out of control.
Do you think that labels matter a lot in the political debate in America, Professor Henderson? I mean, do you think Joe Biden would call himself a capitalist, and should he embrace that label?
Oh, Ben, well, call me Rebecca. It makes me jumpy when people call me Professor Henderson. Would he embrace that label? Would he say he was a capitalist? I think he'd consult his political consultant first, like all the politicians do. But at heart, yes, I think he's a deep believer in the free market. I'm not a member of his transition team. I've only had the pleasure of meeting him face to face once. But in that meeting, I definitely had the sense that he thinks firms should be making decisions, that they should be deciding how much to produce and who to hire. But I also think he's a believer in government. And that's where I'm completely aligned. If you ask me where we need to go, what Bidenomics really should be or ought to be, it should be a recognition that, yes, we need free markets, but we also need free politics, and that markets need guardrails. And it's when you keep government and markets in balance that you get capitalism as it ought to be, when it genuinely provides a just and sustainable world. That's my sort of stump speech.
So putting aside what Joe Biden calls himself and what he wants to do, let's talk about some of the political practicalities. Here's the current state of play in the Senate after the latest elections. And many people think that the Senate's likely to remain in Republican hands when the Georgia runoff elections are completed on the 5th of January, which raises the question of what a Biden White House can practically accomplish on economic policy, not least as the left of the Democrat Party seems to be embracing this European-style democratic socialism, as we mentioned. So does that mean that Joe Biden will inevitably have an economic policy that's defined by deal making and special interests rather than ideology?
I think you can have an agenda defined by deal making and still make a real difference, still be true to your fundamental ideas. I think it's almost certainly the case that he's not going to be able to pass major legislation, even if the Georgia elections go the other way and the Democrats have a slight edge in the Senate. There's still the filibuster. There are Democratic senators who will disagree with the president. So I think the prospect of passing major legislation is probably low. But that doesn't mean there's nothing he can do. Let's just take the most obvious thing. He's going to come into office in the face of the COVID pandemic still roaring at full speed, although I think we all hope we'll be seeing an end to it by then and the vaccine beginning to be rolled out. But he's going to see hundreds of thousands of people, of businesses have gone out of business. Millions of people have lost their jobs. Many, many school children have lost a year's education, and we know that's really bad for their long-term future. So he is going to need a stimulus bill. And I'm hopeful that the Republicans will go along. And in that stimulus bill, in addition to helping people get new jobs and small businesses survive, he can also address some of his major priorities. Let's take climate. To me, addressing climate is a fantastic way to do a stimulus. Let's really double down and invest in renewable energy. That'll create tons of jobs. Some of those are very, very good jobs. So you can get a 2-for-1. And I think suggest to the Republicans that it's in no one's interest just to see the economy tank. And that's not good for America, and it's not good for you.
Well, Green New Deal is certainly not an idea limited to the US. We're hearing about it all around the world. Your book, Reimagining Capitalism, argues that we have to see the purpose of business as much more than maximising profits and shareholder returns. And in the 1970s, about a third of US corporate profits went to shareholders, while the rest went to investment or higher wages. But by 2019, as we can see, 90% of corporate profits went to shareholders, which it's argued has damaged US productivity and the livelihoods of ordinary Americans. But without congressional power, can that trend be reversed?
Whoa. Yes. But I mean, it's a fantastic question, right? But yes, not as thoroughly and as fast, but can the new president begin to make moves in that direction? Absolutely, he can. One of the fundamental reasons that we've seen wages to most ordinary Americans stagnate for the last 20 years, and for many of them actually decline in real terms, is that there's the collective power of employees to negotiate, to talk to firms, to stand up for themselves has really decreased. Conventional unions have really declined. And here in the US, we have nothing like works councils. In Germany, in nearly every major firm, there's a mandated process whereby employees get together, vote for representatives, and those representatives sit down and talk to management, and sometimes actually sit on the board. So could President Biden help with that? Well, sure he could. He could make it easier to form unions. There's been a lot of energy put into making it very, very hard to unionize in the US, and there are some simple regulatory changes that could make a significant difference on that front. He could work with states to support increasing the minimum wage. He could suggest that the federal government increase the minimum wage it pays, and everyone it buys stuff from also has to increase its minimum wage. So these are not grand and dramatic gestures, but I think they might make a real difference.
But how possible is that in the coronavirus crisis, asking firms to raise wages when they're cutting workers left, right, and centre?
Well, I'm a huge fan of something that I call high road employment systems, which is a big, long mouthful for the idea that if you treat people with dignity and respect, pay them a decent wage, and redesign work so that you really take advantage of their independence and creativity, not only is your firm going to be more innovative and more creative, but you can pay more and absolutely turn a profit and survive in today's competitive market. There's a fantastic colleague of mine called Zainab Ton at MIT. She's a professor there. She has a book called The Good Job Strategy. And she shows that in the retail industry, firms that are paying more, but that have given their on-the-ground employees more discretion, more engagement, more meaning, more mission, are doing much better than more conventional firms. We recently saw Walmart significantly raise wages for a bunch of its employees because they've decided she's right. And that, in fact, there's a better way to run the railroad. And there's so much data. I'm not going to swamp you with all the scholarly stuff, but there's a ton of good data now suggesting that, in fact, paying more is good for the people, good for the employees, but it's also good for the firm. And my goodness, it's better for the community and the rest of us as well.
Many of our viewers, I'm sure, will be struck by the optimism that you have about the ability for Joe Biden to transform the American economy. Is it your view, is it the case that all those things that you mentioned, like encouraging unions and paying more for government suppliers, can that all actually be done without the cooperation of the Senate there? Or does this require Mitch McConnell and co to get on board?
I don't want you to take this to the bank, right, in the deep details, but at the high level, the reason I'm pretty confident is on account of something that actually makes me super nervous, which is sometimes called the imperial presidency. That is, we've seen over the last 20 years, US presidents take more and more power. The current incumbent stopped enforcing environmental regulation, just stopped. He stopped immigration, just stopped it dead. And everyone said, like, whoa, is that legal? And we've seen these cases go up to the Supreme Court. And in general, the Supreme Court has been incredibly deferential to what is really a massive expansion of presidential power. He took money out of the defense budget to spend on his wall. Most people thought, like, wait, I thought Congress controlled the purse. Like, what did he just do? Went to the court, I believe, and absolutely it was fine. So President Biden's going to come in and he's going to inherit a much larger sense of what it's appropriate for presidents to do.
Yes.
So look, I'm not optimistic in like, oh, this is all going to be fine. Of course I'm not. Will the Republicans do everything they can to make his presidency a failure? I'm afraid I think they will. But does he have the power of the office? Yes, he does. Does he have many states aligned with him and more than half the population? Let's not forget he won the popular vote by many millions of votes. So he's going to have a broad level of support from at least some fraction of the American people.
That's so fascinating. Now let's drill down a bit more into this issue that we've already mentioned, climate change and climate policy. America remains the biggest emitter of carbon emissions per head, still much bigger than developing countries such as China and India, as you can see from that chart there. Now, as you mentioned, Rebecca, this is an area where Joe Biden does have more room to make a difference. He can use changes in regulation to protect the environment and discourage carbon emissions. So just talk us through a little bit more about what his priorities should be and what the policies should be there on regulation. For instance, the UK has just banned the sale of non-electric cars after 2030. Is it conceivable we could see a regulation like that in the US?
No. Not this year. That's easy. I mean, I wish.
No.
But what we could see, I think, is enforcement of energy efficiency standards on the automotive industry. That's a regulation that's been well established over the last 30 years. Many of the major automobile companies say, yes, we're very comfortable with gradually increasing the efficiency of the cars we sell. And that's, I believe, really a matter of his just making it so. He could significantly increase funding for innovation. So for new technologies like electric vehicles, like better, more energy efficient buildings, he could support change in construction regulations so that buildings need to be more efficient. One of the most carbon efficient regulations ever passed was energy standards for refrigerators and washing machines. So he could tighten energy efficiency standards on, these big gas guzzling appliances like air conditioners and refrigerators. So there's a lot he can do to move the economy in a positive direction. The other area that I'd love to touch on, if you think it's a good way to go,
Please, yeah.
is he could ask firms to tell everyone what they're doing about climate change, and I think about employees. So the kind of fancy name for this is he could insist on environmental, social, and governance reporting, but the kind of intuition is, rather than just telling us about your sales and profits, tell us how much environmental damage or good are you causing? How are you treating your employees? How much are you investing in education? How much are you paying them? What's the turnover rate? He could be telling his investors these things, and I think that might make a huge difference because customers would see it, investors would see it, employers would see it, and that would be a way to put pressure on those firms that are doing the right thing in these spaces in a very concrete and tangible way.
It's really interesting. We like to focus on solutions on CoronaNomics, so it's great to have all this new thinking. The last thing I wanted to ask you about, and we touched on it earlier, was Donald Trump promised to protect American jobs, but his way of doing it was through trade wars, or so he said trade wars would help protect jobs. Is there a better way to do that for Joe Biden?
Yes. If I were the president-elect, I would invest deeply in education and retraining. And I would try and make sure that no matter the color of my skin or where in the US I was born, every kid got a decent education and a chance to participate. It's really striking that in this country, there are still more people who never go to college than there are people who go to university, and that their life chances are significantly worse than those people who get to go to college. So I would really focus on, the 2-year colleges, practical, at the ground. I would try and increase apprenticeships so that more firms take on people and teach them the skills they need in order to be part of the modern world. And lastly, I would have a very different trade policy. I would try and make sure that as I struck trade deals with other countries, which I think is a great thing to do for all kinds of reasons we can talk about, but I would try and make sure that I didn't do that at the expense of American jobs, that I wasn't offshoring jobs to countries which have terrible labor standards, egregiously bad environmental standards, and whether people are using child labor or paying way below the prevailing wage. So I would try and use trade as a way to raise standards globally. And the US is a central enough player that that's not a crazy idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so how realistically would reshoring happen?
There is lots and lots of work to be done in education and healthcare and infrastructure. I mean, look at the state of our bridges. So if I can have one piece of legislation, can it be a big infrastructure bill? Can I invest in roads and bridges and airports and affordable housing? I mean, that might be doable, right? And it would be a great way to increase highly skilled jobs, a route to give people training in the jobs that are very hard to replace by robots or AI. But it's not as if we're going to instantly get the textile business back. That's not what's going to happen. What we need to do is build an economy that is based both on services and high-tech services and in high technology. And we still remain the most innovative country on the planet with the best universities and an amazing workforce. So I am confident if we shifted resources towards the support of these kinds of jobs, we do really well.
Excellent. Well, what a comprehensive and most of all optimistic and hopeful program Rebecca's laid out there. Joe Biden's team, if you are watching, you should get on the phone to her pronto. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Rebecca Henderson, for appearing on CoronaNomics.
I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll be talking to many more top thinkers in the weeks ahead, so please do stay tuned and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And remember, if you like what we're doing, please hit like and share.
And if you'd like to talk to us, just leave us a comment below.
This has been CoronaNomics, brought to you by Econ Films.